A few months ago, my sister disappeared, leaving behind silence and questions. As children, we were inseparable, but over time our paths diverged. My sister made the difficult decision to not be involved in her child's life, turning her over to our parents to raise. My parents, despite their age, have taken it upon themselves to care for my teenage niece who lives with them. They feel that their strength is running out and they are no longer able to fully provide for all of their granddaughter's needs. I have 2 children myself, and I'm sure I don't need more children. One day my parents invited me to talk to them and shared their worries about how hard it was for them to cope with raising their niece because of their age. They offered me to take the girl in, but I declined on the grounds that I already had enough to do with my own children. My mother condemned me for being selfish, mentioning that there was enough space in my house to give my niece a separate room. However, I stood my ground, saying that I was unwilling to take on the additional responsibility. As an alternative, I suggested that I consider adoption for my niece or try to find her mother. My father supported the idea of making finding the mother a priority. He agreed that if the search was unsuccessful, they would seriously consider placing the girl in foster care. I expressed my willingness to assist in the search for my sister in an effort to offer my support in the situation. However, as I left my parents' home, I was confronted with my mother's question, could I live with myself, realizing that my niece might end up in foster care? My answer was frank. I would have a hard time accepting it, as each additional child brings with it increased duties and responsibilities, something I strive to avoid in my life. Adding another child to the family does not seem like a good idea to me. That being said, before I left, my mother accused me of being selfish, calling me self-centered. I tried not to take it personally, wondering if it makes me an idiot for not wanting to take on the upbringing of my sister's daughter. The possibility of seeing your nephew or niece living in foster care is unacceptable to many, including me. However, it seems odd that your mother would put all the responsibility on you, given the difficulties they themselves face in trying to care for a child. Whether or not they can continue to live knowing that they sent her to foster care is an open question. Calling you an idiot for not wanting to take responsibility doesn't make you one. However, there is a certain expectation that someone should seek to be more involved in a child's life. There also seems to be a deep sense of loneliness and abandonment surrounding your niece. Rejected first by her mother, she now stands on the threshold of being abandoned by both her parents and you. This image of a poor child deprived of love and care from loved ones is heartbreaking. Realizing that someone actually cares for her becomes rare in such a situation. Your mom apparently expressed her frustration and walked away, indicating that the grandparents feel unable to continue to care for your niece. At the same time, the expectations of the aunt and uncle in this situation may be minimal. This picture creates an image of a family torn by internal conflict and inability to find common ground, embodying the image of the idiot in the eyes of the accuser. Realizing that you are facing a difficult choice is obvious. With 2 children already, you are not seeking to increase your family, which is a perfectly normal desire. However, the point that you are acting selfishly by refusing to take on the care of your children's cousin or sibling has a place. Assuming that your parents can help care for 3 children may be presenting the situation in a slightly more optimistic light than it actually is. It's important to note that while this may lighten the load on you, it doesn't address the root problem, responsibility for the child. The question of why the father of the child is not being held accountable is a weighty one. If it still exists, why is the pressure being placed specifically on you? It is also worth reflecting on the role of other family members and society at large in this situation. It is true that the grandparents have taken on the care of their granddaughter, but their age and physical condition call into question their ability to continue to do so at the appropriate level. The decision to put all the responsibility on you, despite the fact that your parents initially took care of the child, seems disproportionate. It is important to realize that the moral responsibility in this situation is shared by many, and the decision, whatever it is, must consider the welfare of the child first. Next story. My child is involved in a fundraiser for the school that involves selling chocolate and almonds. Personally, I wouldn't mind simply donating the amount needed, avoiding the trade. However, the rules are clear that this approach is not allowed. To that end, I suggested to my spouse that she use the petty cash she had saved up from my office to buy a couple boxes of the product. My plan was to take these chocolates to work and distribute them to coworkers for free. My wife, however, is convinced that I am thereby ignoring the main idea of the event. She thinks I should take my son and personally handle the sales. From my point of view, such an undertaking seems somewhat absurd. Surely my time could be spent on more useful and enjoyable activities than going around the neighbors in hopes of persuading them to buy chocolate. Offering my wife a choice between participating personally or using my funds has suddenly caused her to be perplexed. She now considers me unreasonable, accusing me of undervaluing her time. She is currently unemployed, but plans to return to a professional career when our youngest turns 2. I, on the other hand, am employed full-time, spending about 60 hours weekly at work, not counting travel time. The suggestion of spending some of my precious vacation time on street bidding seems completely unacceptable to me. Thus, the idea that I should personally participate in the sales does not find favor with me because I value every minute of my free time. There is a perception that school fundraisers can be controversial because they often associate the use of child labor with pressuring others to donate. One recalls personal experience of participating in such events, where it was required that family members be financially obliged for every kilometer covered in a charity run. Such funds ostensibly went to good causes, such as a new gymnasium, but the promised results sometimes went unfulfilled even after many years. Nevertheless, it is important to remember that the purpose of such events is not always solely financial. They also provide a unique opportunity to spend time with your own child, to support their efforts, and to participate together in an important event for the school community. In this context, claims that free time is too valuable to share with a child in such activities may be perceived as neglecting important aspects of the parental role. The role of the parent includes not only providing for the material needs of the child, but also imparting life lessons such as teamwork, learning the value of labor, and learning gratitude. The use of technology as a means of evading the direct educational process can be criticized as choosing the path of least resistance. Thus, family dialogue and understanding, finding compromise and shared solutions to participation in school activities can be the key to strengthening family bonds and developing positive qualities in the child. Understanding the importance of teaching a child how to communicate with strangers, take responsibility for money, persevere, and achieve goals is important. These skills are key to personal development and future success. At the same time, the ways to teach them can vary, and not all methods are appropriate for every family. Realizing that fundraising may not always be the ideal way to achieve these teachable moments is important. Deciding how best to utilize limited shared time should be based on the family's shared interests and values. It is important to emphasize that instead of participating in fundraising activities, other ways of interacting and learning together can be found that are more meaningful and enjoyable for both parties. For example, planning camping trips together, participating in volunteer projects, or simply spending time playing educational games can be much more fruitful and relationship building. Considering alternative ways for children to bond and learn avoids the potential discomfort of asking others for financial support. Setting interesting challenges and goals for yourself and your child can lead to mutually enjoyable and enriching moments that will be the foundation for strong family bonds and the development of a responsible and self-sufficient person. A story that really surprised me. I turned 30 this year and I am continuing my college education. I met Food during my second semester last year. She's 19. We took 2 classes together. From the very first day, we shared a common ground. We have many similar interests. Phoebe is characterized by kindness and intelligence, which immediately attracted my attention. In the summer, Phoebe faced a major challenge. She was diagnosed with cancer. She spent several months in hospital. She now needed to attend outpatient chemotherapy regularly, every 2 weeks on Thursdays. One day, Phoebe called me. She told me that her grandfather was supposed to drive her to the procedure but couldn't make it. She asked if I could pick her up after her chemotherapy session. On the drive home, Phoebe fell asleep. Given that Phoebe is one of 6 children in her family, which is constantly noisy, I decided it would be best for her to rest in silence. So I offered to let her stay at my apartment. When I arrived home, I gently woke Phoebe up and settled her on the couch, making sure she was comfortable and bringing some warm blankets. She expressed her deep gratitude to me for the opportunity to stay and rest at such a difficult time. However, I left out one point. My mom, who lives with us, usually sleeps on this couch. That detail completely slipped my mind when I brought food home. When my mom came home, she was surprised to find Phoebe sleeping on the couch. I hurriedly explained the circumstances that had brought food to our house. Mom expressed her displeasure that I had provided Phoebe's couch without her consent, calling it disrespectful of me. To resolve the situation, I called my husband. He was sympathetic and offered a solution. He took an air mattress and extra blankets for Mom. Despite this, Mom continued to be unhappy about the couch being given away overnight. On Friday afternoon, I drove food back home. My husband was supportive, acknowledging that my actions were driven by a desire to help, but he also recognized that Mom had a right to be upset. Realizing the complexity of what had happened, I couldn't shake the guilt I felt for embarrassing my mom by offering Phoebe's couch, even though my mom lives with us. Phoebe's family situation leaves a lot to be desired. Her family's attitude towards her illness is concerning. None of Phoebe's family comes to the hospital, and she only goes for procedures when it does not interfere with her family's plans. Her requests for help and understanding go unheeded. When Phoebe tried to discuss her needs with her mom during treatment, she was told that the family cannot stop her life because of her illness. Phoebe shares a room with her younger teenage sister, who often hosts friends. Because of this, there is constant noise and commotion in the house, which prevents Phoebe from finding a quiet place to rest. Under these circumstances, the couch in my home became a safe haven for her where she could get some rest. My determination to provide Phoebe with a place to rest led to a conflict with my mom. I promised my mom the couch, but ended up offering it to Phoebe without consulting my mom. My mom then had to sleep on an air mattress. My actions were motivated by a desire to provide Phoebe with comfort in a difficult situation, but it led to misunderstandings within my own family. The situation highlights the difficulty of choosing between wanting to help a friend and having to consider the needs and feelings of loved ones. In deciding to help Phoebe, your actions were purely motivated, but they caused your mother disappointment. Her dissatisfaction was not only a matter of comfort, but also of respect for her habits and feelings. Thinking about the future, it is hard for me to imagine that my child, decades later, would neglect my presence in her life. Even imagining myself in such a situation, I would try to treat it with humor despite the possible disappointment. On the other hand, it seems unusual that you are not taking your mom's feelings about this situation seriously. Often people become too focused on immediate problems, losing sight of the importance of close relationships. If my mom were faced with a similar circumstance, seeing a girl struggling with an illness and needing support after chemotherapy, she would likely react with sympathy and concern. It is incomprehensible to me how anyone could be upset by such a show of kindness, even if it results in a temporary inconvenience at home. Thus, your actions, though they cause misunderstanding, came from a desire to help a friend in need. At the same time, I realize that it is important to consider the feelings of all involved in the situation in an effort to find harmony and understanding within the family. My next story. My brother and I, both teenagers, had to deal with the loss of our father 10 years ago. 6 years later, our mom married Jared. About a year after their wedding, my mom asked us a question. She wondered how we would feel about Jared adopting us. This could have involved changing or adding his last name to our last names, possibly hyphenated. I rejected the idea, and my brother, following my lead, agreed with my mom that additional discussion was needed during family therapy. We began attending therapy sessions for several months. When the lockdown period came, the sessions had to be suspended. Upon returning to therapy after the office reopened, our mom regularly inquired about our feelings. She wanted to know if our attitudes had changed toward the idea of adoption. Recently, Mom decided to apply the separation and power method that the therapist had suggested. She tried to discuss adoption separately with my brother, but he remained adamant. My brother firmly stated that he would refuse as long as I continued to say no. At another conversation, my mom inquired about the reasons for my refusal to adopt. She explained that she had a strong case for the decision, including providing protection for us in the event of her death so that we could stay with her husband. I questioned whether her persistent interest in adoption was related to my desire to live with paternal relatives she didn't like in the event of anything, and whether my opinion in the matter would carry more weight if the adoption didn't go through. At first, my mom denied it, but then admitted it. I expressed my position. I don't need a new legal father and don't need the protection that adoption offers. My mom shared that my brother was giving up adoption following my example and hoped that if I changed my mind, he would change his mind as well. I made it clear that none of her beliefs would make me reconsider my position. When she asked me to at least try to get my brother to agree to the adoption, I refused, reaffirming my intention not to change my mind. Despite my decision, I decided to talk to my brother about the whole situation. He confirmed that he did not want an adoption without my consent and would feel uncomfortable if Jared adopted one of us but not the other. The fact that my brother doesn't remember our father and has no attachment that would be an obstacle for him, as it was for me, didn't matter in his decision. I assured him that I would not be angry if he decided to say yes, but he expressed his solidarity with me. Subsequently, Mom and Jared tried again to convince me to agree to the adoption so that Jared could become my brother's legal father. My repeated refusal caused Mom to cry and rage. Jared, on the other hand, addressed my argument of maturity and compromise, pointing out that even if I didn't have strong feelings for him, that was no reason to choose foster care over his guardianship in the event of Mom's death. He also emphasized that by my refusal I was putting my brother at risk, calling my behavior rash. This conversation highlights the complexity of our family situation and the different perspectives on how best to protect the interests of all family members. In the current situation, there are other aspects of the adoption and contingency custody issue that need to be considered. It is important to realize that a change of name or legal status in the family does not directly affect contingency guardianship plans. If a need for custody arises, the court will make a decision in the child's best interest, taking into account the possibility of living with relatives who can foster the child. The teen's opinion about where he or she wants to live plays a significant role. Talking to relatives such as grandparents or aunts who can influence Mom is worth considering as a possible way to resolve conflict. At the same time, if current family therapy seems manipulative rather than supportive, it is helpful to seek alternative support resources, perhaps in the school system or through other available channels of help. If the adoption process seems like a tool of manipulation or a way to influence others, it is important to maintain your own boundaries and strive to build healthy relationships with both paternal and maternal relatives. At the same time, it is important to remind all parties involved of the importance of maturity and the ability to accept rejection as part of the life experience without resorting to emotional outpourings in response to setbacks. Now I want to tell a different story. My girlfriend and I decided to organize a double date this weekend with my friend and his date. This event we have been planning for a long time. For this purpose, I took care of transportation costs and booking a hotel room for the previous weekend in advance. At the same time, my girlfriend went to meet her colleagues for lunch and drinks, promising not to linger and limiting herself to a couple of cocktails after the meal. Despite her plans, she didn't come home all night, which in itself was acceptable to me. However, the next morning she confessed that she had spent more than anticipated and now could not afford to participate in our planned date. She suggested that I cover all the expenses myself or else we would have to cancel our event since she was unable to participate financially. I didn't hide my annoyance as she had been aware of our plans for weeks and should have factored that into her budget. I pointed out that she should have stuck to the original plan of returning home at the agreed time, which would have avoided this problem. In response, she merely pointed out that there was no way to change what had happened because no one from the company was going to leave and everyone had decided to stay. I emphasized that she should have paid attention to our other plans and not expected me to cover the cost of her evening, especially since she had ignored our joint arrangements. She objected, thinking my response unfair. I tried to explain how awkward the situation seemed now that she preferred the company of her coworkers, refusing to turn them down instead of sticking to our plans. She insisted that I was being unfair, arguing that if I had paid her portion, nothing would have to be canceled. I rejected the idea, offering instead to loan her the amount she needed so she could cover her own expenses later, refusing to pay for it just because she went over her budget during a meeting with her coworkers. She rejected my loan offer, accusing me of being stupid for bringing up the argument in the first place and called me an idiot for refusing to pay all the expenses. She was confident in her action, expecting you to cover the cost of the double date. Her surprise at your refusal and subsequent pressure suggests that the conflict did not come from you. In this situation, she is responsible. It seems she assumed she could influence your decisions to get the outcome she wanted. It seems to me that you were not prioritized in her plans, and she viewed your finances as rightfully hers. Watching this, it becomes obvious that perhaps this was some sort of test of the strength of your relationship. The question of how you would react to her all-night absence and subsequent demands seems to have been part of a larger context. Social media such as Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok often show similar scenarios, influencing perceptions of relationships. The advice I would like to give is to avoid the habit of giving or borrowing from your partner. Unpaid debt can become a constant source of tension or even an argument between partners. The best course of action is to either share what you have unconditionally or avoid financial obligations to each other. This is my personal opinion on the matter.